Hello. Welcome back to our channel. With the world of photography constantly evolving, it is in the best interests of photographers to be on top of their game through research and learning. Our video on 277 photography tips today sure provides something substantial for everyone to sink their teeth into. Because there's a lot to go through today, we will hit the ground running. We begin with beginner photography tips that the experts swear by. Then as we delve further into the video, we will zero in on more specific tips for more specific kinds of photography. Photography tip 1. You don't need the most expensive gear just yet. Don't go crazy. You can take amazing photos even with your affordable point and shoot. What you need to take better photos, for now, isn't better gear. It's practice. The truth is that, as you get more familiar with cameras and their accessories, you begin to find that the difference between some of these accessories are not so many. At least at a particular price range, nearly everything you get is quite good. Plus, many of the entry-level DSLR cameras you find today are even better than the high-end film SLR cameras you find today. Yet, these film photographers are making it work somehow. So, for now, focus on your skills, not your gear. Photography tip 2. Your composition deserves some thought. If you want your photos to come out engaging, then you're going to have to put some thought into what you're photographing. Actually put some thought into it while composing your photos so they come out looking good. This means that you must learn the basics of compositions. Although we go in depth on composition tips later in this video, there are a few we can share right off the bat. For instance, you don't want to remove important aspects of the subject with the edges of the frame. It's also important to remove distractions from the photo and to keep the horizons level as well. Finally, check out if the end result has a sense of simplicity and balance. Don't worry if it doesn't look good at first, just keep at it until you finally get it. Photography tip 3. Not all settings matter. Especially as a beginner, you could easily get overwhelmed at all the settings there are on a camera. In fact, even expert photographers sometimes struggle with these things sometimes. So, it's perfectly normal to feel a little intimidated at first. But then again, as a beginner, your first duty is to learn. This means that you must practice taking photos with other modes besides full auto. If you continue to take photos in full auto, you won't learn anything as the camera would be making all the decisions for you. Sure, in the beginning, it's a struggle, but with some reading, you will begin to get the grasp of things. That said, like the heading says, not all settings matter. At least, not yet. For now, the three most important of all the settings you have are your shutter speed, ISO, and aperture. Once you've gotten a good grasp of those, you then want to learn to focus correctly. For now, you might want to go for the one-shot AD if the subject is stationary, and AI servo if the subject is moving. Please avoid shooting using manual focus for now, except lighting is so poor your autofocus isn't functioning. Finally, a setting you must not compromise is RAW. Shoot in RAW. This way, whether you want to edit the photos right away or that's something you think you might want to do in future, you have enough latitude to do that. Photography tip 4. Avoid overexposing your highlights. In picking camera settings, make sure you don't end up overexposing your highlights. If you do that, you won't be able to recover detail in the white areas of that photo. Fortunately, it's quite easy to ensure that your highlights stay intact. But this means that you'd have to master your aperture, ISO and shutter speed settings like we mentioned earlier. These settings are the only ones which affect how bright your photos turn out directly. Of course, barring flash settings. So, when taking your photos, you want to watch the screen to be sure there's no overexposure. If you, however, notice there is, then the first step to take is to reduce ISO to base value, which is usually ISO 100. If your ISO is already at 100 and you still have that problem, then try using a faster shutter speed. With these two fixed, you shouldn't have problems with overexposure. As for the aperture, this hardly constitutes a problem so long you don't have it set to something crazy like f/32, f/45 and the rest. Photography tip 5. Light is super important. You've definitely heard it said before. Light is perhaps the singular most important variable in photography. Taking photos with correct lighting is a major step in the right direction when it comes to taking photos. So, what is great lighting? It's not just about sunsets. When it comes to lighting, what you want to aim for is to balance light intensity so it doesn't clash between your subject and the background. Even a photo of a beautiful sunset can get ruined by a dark, silhouetted foreground. So, how do you fix this? Focus on the direction of the light, as well as the softness of the light. Light that is too harsh will cause shadows to form, and this could be a big problem, especially if you're doing portraits. If the angle of the light isn't exactly flattering, try moving it around, if it's a studio. If you're outdoors, try to change the position of the subject. And if it's landscapes you're doing, then perhaps wait till the lighting gets better. Handheld photos, especially, need enough light. If you can't get that, then use your flash or change your position. Photography tip 6. Slow down. If you're always in a hurry, you'd make a lot of missteps. So, always learn to take your time, especially when you're still learning the ropes. Double check your settings. You don't want to be using night settings for an outdoor shoot, for instance. How about your composition, autofocus and light? Are they perfect? Again, while you might not want to review photos in the heat of an amazing action right in front of you, it's good to check out your photos when you have some lag time. Better to sort the problems when you're in the field than to come back and observe them on your computer. Photography tip 7. Keep moving. Don't just stay in a place when taking your photos. Try to move around with your feet and/or your tripod. You can't have your entire portfolio showing photos without any form of experimentation at all. It would be boring and you'd have missed out on some potentially awesome shots. Plus, by moving your feet, you get to change your subject's size and relative position in the photo. If, for instance, there's a distraction in your composition, you can move around until the object is out of the frame or at least no longer distracting. Photography tip 8. There are times to use a tripod, know them. A tripod is one of the camera accessories you are advised to get as a beginner because it solves a number of problems, especially lack of proper lighting. Using a tripod, you'd be able to capture details accurately even in scenarios that are too dark for the human eye to see clearly. Also, tripods give your composition stability, also helping you take sharper photos. Now, if your subject is stationary, then you almost always have to use a tripod to take the photos. So, in summary, if you're into architectural photography, landscape, or still life, you absolutely need a tripod. For certain photography types like event photography and action, a tripod might slow you down. Travel photographers might also feel like a tripod would constitute a burden, and it might. But, if you don't always have a tripod, truth is you miss out on a lot of great photos. Photography tip 9. Know when a flash is required. We all know that flashes are used in the dark. But do you know that a flash can also be useful outdoors? Well, they can. You've probably heard of the phrase, "fill flash," but if you haven't, it's actually quite simple. So, there's this ugly shadow on your subject and, of course, that has to go. You can make use of a gentle flash while taking the photo such that no one can tell, at the end of the day, when they see the photo. Photography tip 10. Keep your camera lens clean. The quickest and easiest way to get blurry photos every time is to work with smudged-up camera lenses. Sure, there will always be that little bit of dust in every lens which, thankfully, do not affect photo quality. However, there is literally no excuse for grimy lenses smudged with fingerprints literally begging to be cleaned. Make sure you own a lens cleaning solution and small microfiber cloth with which to wipe your lenses, and then do that, at least, weekly. Photography tip 11. Avoid cheap filters. Second to dirty lenses, another way to end up with blurry photos every time is to use a cheap filter. Best to avoid them altogether. Photography tip 12. Pick up basic post-processing skills. Although, right now, it might not look like post should be your primary focus, some basic post skills might actually be of great help to the young photographer. Now, in the beginning, you might find yourself overdoing it a little bit. That's normal, you're still learning. So, for this reason, it's always best to ensure that your edits are not permanent. That is, no destructive editing. So, you either want to save as, or you can edit using software that preserves your original file. With time, you definitely get better at processing, which is why it is good to start early. But also, keep in mind that you want to be quite subtle so your photos don't come out looking overtly processed. Photography tip 13. Always back up your photos. Your hard drive will eventually break down. It's not a possibility. It's a fact. So, it would be silly and amateurish to have all your photos in one hard drive. You need to ensure that every single photo you take is backed up. No exception. So, there's this rule called the 3-2-1 rule. In essence, at every given time, you must have 3 copies of each of your photos, at least. These copies should come in 2 different media forms, at least. Maybe one in the internal hard drive and another in a removable storage device. Then, one of the backups must be in off-site storage. Photography tip 14. Stay organized. The idea of being organized goes beyond making your work faster with easy-to-find photos. If your photos are disorganized, there's a good chance you could delete a whole folder containing important images before you realize it. Develop a method that works for you and that's easy to help you remain organized so you don't run into issues. Photography tip 15. Be willing to experiment. Photography becomes more interesting when the photographer is willing to try new things. Don't fall into the trap of routine. Once in a while, why not try going out on a limb? Different lighting, different location, different post-processing style, something fresh. You'll definitely find something new that you can always apply to your photography for the best results. Or you could create memories. Either ways, win-win. Photography tip 16. Keep a company of photographers. To keep inspiration fresh, it's good for photographers to surround themselves with fellow photographers. The truth is, many photographers love to share the techniques and tips they use with other photographers. Even if you like to learn on your own, still make out time to mix up with other photographers. Another good place to find fellow photographers are online forums. Plus, you can email photographers you love and respect too. Photography tip 17. Don't be afraid to call yourself out on your weaknesses. While you're still on your road to perfection, it's really easy to fall back to your comfort zone when the going gets tough. Don't. Instead of trying to gloss over your flaws, work to fix them. That's the best way to improve. This advice would also work for experts as well. Photography tip 18. Revisit your old photos. This tip is similar to the one before it. Revisiting your old photos will help you find out what your weak points are so you can fix them. Also, from time to time, it's possible to strike photography gold that you never noticed before while digging through the archives. Photography tip 19. Learn all the rules. Rules are not bad. They don't hinder creativity either. Truth is, if you don't learn them first, you'd break them in a way that would make your photos look horrible. So, learn the rules first before you break them. However, you don't have to learn them all before you pick up the camera. Learn as you shoot. Photography tip 20. Exposure and focus come first before framing. If your photo isn't properly saved, it might be saved. However, if exposure and focus are not right, the photo is, practically, unusable. So, be mindful of exposure and focus, especially when the scene is extremely lit or extremely dark. If you've enjoyed this video, click the subscribe button below and hit the notification bell so you'll know once we post a new video. Also drop a comment below so we can know your thoughts. Finally, don't forget to check the description below for more details and visit our site, www.what-camera.com, for more awesome camera content like this.